Hi. You know how some news stories just kick you in the guts, as if it's not exactly happened to you exactly, but somehow to all of us? Well, that's how I felt a few years ago when I heard about the suicide of young Stuart Kelly. I felt kind of sick, and immediately my heart went out to his parents, Ralph and Kathy, his sister Madeline. They'd already had to endure a few years before that the death of Stuart's older brother, Thomas, who'd been killed in an unprovoked coward punch attack. Both boys were only 18. Like many of you, I guess, at the time I wondered what it must be like to be the Kellys, to be a family struck twice by lightning. Well, Ralph and Kathy are here to talk with me tonight, and amazingly, considering the pain and the anger they must be carrying, they're here in part to talk about kindness. Because some of what they have to say tonight may stir stuff in people watching, we're going to be putting up the number for Lifeline during this interview. Before we start, a request. As you watch Ralph and Kathy tonight, I'd like you to imagine what it must be like to be a private person and not just put your life, but your very self up for public scrutiny, because to do the opposite, to stay silent in the face of tragedy, would be too crushing. Imagine that. Deep breaths, let's go. Please welcome Ralph and Kathy Kelly. Thanks both for your time tonight. We're going to go through some tricky territory, but I thought I'd start with the joy. Tell me about your flirting days, your courting days. Who made the first move and how was it made?
Well, we both worked for Qantas back in those early days, and we hadn't met each other, but we were invited to a party, and I was always quite timid and shy, so I'd always stay back and not really talk to anybody. And then Kathy came up, I think, and started talking to me and said, "Who are you?" And I said, "I own a fish and chip shop in Rose Bay, and I sail a yacht on the harbour." And she was besotted from the beginning, Andrew, I think.
I'm not quite sure that's how I remember it.
How do you remember it?
Well, funnily enough, the girl that invited me to the party, I took her to another party. She met her husband and I met mine, so that was quite nice. But
one of those swingers parties, it sounds
no,
like.
it wasn't quite like that. But, yeah, I guess we were pretty young, and it was... Ralph and I had just been for the same job in Qantas.
Oh.
And I think...
Which one of you got it?
Neither of us.
Okay.
But then there was another job and I got it.
Yes.
So I like to rub that in.
So what were you attracted to in Ralph?
He was very cute and...
Still am.
Still is, you know. We've changed a little bit over the years. Yeah. But, yeah, no, he was really nice. And when he told me he owned a fish and chip shop, I said, "No, you don't. You're Ralph Kelly that went for the same job as me."
Oh, I see. And first date, what was that like?
Oh, that was pretty horrendous, actually.
You shouldn't ask these
I wasn't
questions.
sure if he was going to pay, so, because in those days the men did pay.
Which I did.
I remember driving to his house and he opened the door. He said, "Come in and meet Walter." And I said, "Oh, Walter must be his flatmate. Let's just check the two of them out." There's a cat sitting up on the top of the kitchen cupboards peeling the plaster off the walls.
Yeah, see, I would have ended the relationship there. A cat called Walter is unacceptable, I think. So let's talk about the family, the five of you. Tell me about the Roaring Kellys at your finest.
What's our Roaring Kellys?
Well, the kids were all very close. Obviously, Thomas was the oldest, and then Madeline was 18 months younger than Tom, and Stu was 4 years younger again. And look, they all loved each other like any normal family.
Lots of arguing.
They argued and they tested each other's limits, but they were very close.
Was there a family joker?
Stuart was the joker, always was, to the bitter end.
And what was a typical Stuart joke?
Well, after Thomas died and he had left school, he was working at North Shore Private Hospital in the storeroom, and he started calling me Catheter. So I kind of thought that was really quite cute and funny, you know. He just had that way about him that he could turn anything into something that was humorous and lovely and meaningful.
If he was calling you Catheter, he was clearly taking the piss.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, very much
Yeah,
so.
that's a Stuart kind of a joke, I think, yes.
Absolutely, yeah, yeah.
So tell me about the three children growing up, the kind of people they were and are.
I think, Thomas was the first child and he wasn't really a shy kid. I think he started to get shy when he went to school. So at home, we had one of those big red cars and Madeline would be toddling along behind it trying to learn how to walk and he'd come flying out of nowhere, dive into the car and take off and Madeline would fall flat on her face and start bawling her eyes out because Thomas had just done something nasty, which was pretty typical.
Of a brother, yes.
Yeah. And then Madeline came along and she was a bubbly little thing, wasn't she? There was something about her that she was just easy, wasn't she? She was always an easy child. And then Stuart came along and, I think Tom's first word was Jessie, which was the dog's name when he was almost 2. And at 1.5, Stuart's first line was, "Oh, what a beautiful day it is today, Mummy."
Wow.
where did that come from? So they were all quite different.
Yeah. Ralph, just tell me about the relationship between the three kids. How did they connect?
You know what it's like. They used to play tennis, everything together. We used to play tennis and cricket in the backyard. There was lots of laughter. I look back on those days very fondly. My love for my children was, boundless. And, they were just a joy.
After Thomas died, after that unprovoked attack, 4 different people in one house, how did you each handle your grief?
Oh, I was just destroyed. I mean, he was my beautiful first baby, and how do you ever come to terms with the fact that your child's not going to be there to outlive you, to live a life that he so much deserved? I guess from my point of view, I wasn't a working mother. I was at home with the children, and Ralph had to eventually get himself together to try and keep his business alive. And the kids were busy at school, and I found myself quite angry at times because I couldn't understand why they didn't seem to feel the way I was feeling. So I found myself quite deeply lonely, and it's very difficult for anybody to understand what it's like.
I can imagine. Ralph, how was it for you?
It hit me really badly. I was completely devastated. Friends would phone me and email me. I couldn't reply. The only people I spoke to were the police. Probably for 2 months, I just completely locked myself away from the world. And
from the family as well?
From my own family, yes. Literally, it was just my world was shattered, destroyed. I just, fell over totally.
And I think many watching would understand both of your reactions deeply. You both, after Thomas's death, launched the Thomas Kelly Youth Foundation, and you in particular, Ralph, threw yourself into that. You put volunteers and created safe spaces on the streets to help people who had difficulties with the behaviour brought on by alcohol. And you both were leaders in the campaign to change the liquor laws in Sydney, which led to what's known as the lockout laws. In 2015, Stuart spoke at the gala function for the foundation. We have some footage of that here.
It's time for change. Action is needed through strong leadership from the New South Wales State Government and the Federal Government. Action is needed by our friends and our families across all of our communities. Change to stop the growing epidemic of drug and alcohol abuse and misuse, and to say no to senseless violence. Australia is an alcoholic. We need to rethink the way we drink.
I look at that and I see both an adult and a boy. I know you've watched that footage many times.
He was 17.
17.
In that presentation.
When you look at Stuart there, what do you see?
I know deep within my very soul that he would never have got up there if he didn't want to do it. He was that kind of boy. You could not make him talk to somebody he'd had an argument with unless he wanted to do it. He'd run in the opposite direction. But I think to do what he did it because he wanted to do it. But sometimes I get quite annoyed when I read various things that is in the media about how Stuart was the spokesperson for the lockout laws. He got up that night because his father asked him if he would like to do something at the event. He didn't go to the first event. He didn't want to be a part of it. He was a little boy. And, you know, I just have absolute admiration for him for doing what he did and for taking that stance. But I truly believe he did it because he wanted to have a few words to say because his brother wasn't here to be able to save him.
Ralph, what kind of blowback did Stuart get for speaking those words, for speaking out about alcohol?
Well, there was a lot of accolades for him in the beginning. It wasn't until February 2016 when the review of the lockout laws started. And that's when there were people who were campaigning against the family and anyone who had anything to do with the lockout laws. And it became very difficult because it was constantly on social media, mistruths. It affected both Madeline and Stuart. You know, Stuart would read the papers every day, so we knew that he was seeing it.
What sort of things were being said about Stuart in particular?
There was one particular blog that called him a puppet, a private schoolboy puppet, and...
because he'd made that speech?
He made that speech.
Okay.
And when we drove in, he was sitting in the gutter with his head in his hands. And when he got into the back seat of the car, he started to sob uncontrollably.
If I may, I'd just like to step through what happened with Stuart. The following year, you were at a freshman's dinner at St Paul's, a college at Sydney University, with Stuart, who was about to embark on a course. What was the scene when you left him that night?
I think it was a pretty jovial kind of scene. I mean, we'd been through the dinner and we'd heard all the things from the warden and various people that got up and spoke that evening about how, you know, too much alcohol or drugs or, you know, bad behaviour towards women wouldn't be accepted from these young men. But to hear them referred to as men when really these boys had only stepped out of school a few months earlier was a little bit distressing in some ways. We were then taken down to the college, had its own bar, and we were encouraged as parents to put some money on the tab for our kids. And then we were all asked to leave. And Stuart doesn't like any fuss, you know, he's a pretty down-to-earth kid, and he just said, you know, come, get out, Mum, Dad, go. It's time for you to leave.
Stop embarrassing me.
And we went. We went and we left what we thought was a pretty happy kid.
The next morning, Ralph, you got a phone call from Stuart, not from university, but from up the road. He was distressed and he wanted you to come and pick him up. When you got there, what did you find?
So it was the following afternoon, and when we drove in, he was sitting in the gutter with his head in his hands. And when he got into the back seat of the car, he started to sob uncontrollably, which was completely out of character for him. And that was, you know, really alarming because he was this young boy starting the next stage of his life after school, and suddenly it had all just completely disappeared.
He spent, I think, 2 months pretty much in his room.
More or less.
He refused to go back to uni.
Yeah.
But more than that, he wouldn't tell you what had happened.
No.
How many ways did you try to see
I
if he
think
would talk?
you know, I was home, Ralph was working, so I would go in and try and talk to him about things, and he was very clear. Like when I said before, you know, he would never do anything he didn't want to do. He was very straightforward. You are not going to know. Leave me alone. We're not discussing it.
That must have been torturous for you.
It was very difficult, but he also did a complete turnabout about what he wanted to do with his life. You know, he'd made a beautiful rocking chair for the HSC, and he said, oh, maybe I'll just go do some woodworking. And I'm saying, you know, I said all the wrong things, like, you know, we didn't pay to send you, you know, struggle to send you through this school to have you turning timber. And I could kick myself now because I wouldn't care what state he was in. If he was in that bedroom, I'd be happier than anything. I wouldn't care what he wanted to do with his life or how disillusioned he was about life. I just wanted him to be here. So I think, you know, as much as we did and spoke and questioned about all the things that a parent does because they love their child, I just feel that I said all the wrong things and we weren't really listening to him. But he was very not secretive. He just didn't want to open up to us about what he was feeling. There was never a moment at any point in time before that day that he left the house and took his life that we ever thought that that could happen.
Ralph, what do you think happened that night at St Paul's?
It's very difficult to know. There is still a police investigation continuing as we speak.
You've spoken to people who were there on that night, though.
We've spoken to people who were there. We have been advised that he was held down with alcohol that was being poured down his throat, and he was being bullied over the lockout laws, that we were being made fun of. He asked the people holding him down to stop, but they didn't, so eventually he broke free. And basically, he wasn't seen again until when we picked him up.
So people say.
At 4 o'clock the following afternoon. So he didn't sleep that night in his bed. We know that for a fact because Kathy made the bed and it had been untouched. And so there's this mystery. Somebody knows where he was that night and what happened to him.
It just seems to me that he was somewhere against his will, and whatever that entailed, I feel that there was a level of, I don't think embarrassment is the word, but something along those lines that he couldn't live with.
Shame.
And some kind of shame that he could never divulge to us. And he had been speaking to some girl in Canada somewhere that he met online. And when she did get in touch with Madeline through social media, she did say that she had asked Stuart what happened at St Paul's that night, and he said, if you ever ask me that again, I will cut off all contact with you. Wow. So that,
it was very, very deep.
To me, says something catastrophic happened to our son that night. It wasn't just about being held down with alcohol, which was happening to not just him, but many of the freshmen. Slowly,
Stuart started to emerge. He got work and he appeared well. And then 5 months after, he made the decision to end his life. Looking back, what do you see now that you didn't see then?
He was, happy, telling jokes. He appeared to be back to his old self. He started to ask me that he wanted to go to London. And I actually said we were walking the dog one day, just the two of us, and I said to him, look, Stuart, if you did go overseas, we would definitely want you to see a counsellor just to talk about it to make sure that you're okay again. And he just turned and looked at me and said, Dad, look at me. Do I look like I need counselling? And I just went, no. He appeared 100% normal.
In hindsight, is that how it seems to you, though?
Oh, look, in hindsight, I would have taken him on a plane that afternoon and obviously, got him out of Australia.
And Madeline said that very thing. She said, if I had have known what he was contemplating that night, I wouldn't have woken you and Dad. I would have packed a couple of things and we would have left for the airport, Stuart and I.
How hard are the what-ifs?
Oh, they're terrible. And what happened to Thomas was a horrendous part of our lives, but he was happy when he died. He was holding a girl's hand. He was going out for a night of fun. But how did we fail our son? That's what it feels like every day, that, this beautiful boy that was the joy of our life didn't want to live anymore. And he could not talk to us about that. And I just, as a parent, that's just devastating. What could we have done to have stopped him?
Ralph, what impact do you think that night at St Paul's had on Stuart's decision?
It was a massive impact because he had lost his way, and if something had happened to him and he couldn't live with it, then that was the deciding factor. It's as Kathy said, it's, you lose one side to homicide and another son to suicide. It's, you couldn't get two worse cards.
No. Kathy mentioned that the people infer that you pushed Stuart into making that speech. Is there a part of you blames yourself for what happened that night at St Paul's?
Of course. Of course. We, look, when Thomas died, as I said before, I just collapsed. I couldn't work. and I started, my brother-in-law, who's a doctor, when we had turned off Thomas's life support in ICU at St Vincent's, as we were walking out, he just whispered in my ear, you know, get angry. And 3 months later, I understood what he meant by that. And I wanted to find out what had made Sydney an unsafe city. So I started to meet as many people as I could every day, with anyone who I thought could educate me on what was going on in the city. How can an 18-year-old boy go out and be dead in 2 minutes? And so I immersed myself 18 hours a day, 7 days a week. And did that affect Stuart? Undoubtedly.
That's very hard. You told our producer that there are times where you wish that the man who punched Thomas would die in prison. So how do you reconcile your understandable anger with a desire to be kind?
I don't think it's a particularly healthy way to live your life, to feel that angry towards somebody. And I think had there ever been any remorse shown or by him or his family, that maybe I could have come to terms with some kind of forgiveness.
You've written a book together about your last 7 years, Too Soon, Too Late, and part of that book is wanting to address the lies you believe have been told about you. What are the lies that have hurt you the most?
It's not really so much the lies. It's there's a lot of media, what's called reporting, which you kind of expect. But we wanted to let people know the true story of, why we're involved in advocating for not only the lockout laws, but also changes to sentencing laws within New South Wales as well. There's about 5 different changes to laws and new laws brought in. I just became passionate to make a difference because when you walk into the Supreme Court, when it's a homicide case, you believe that the person who's died will be kind of looked after by the system. And it was the complete opposite. Every time we walked into the Supreme Court, it was a nightmare, just every day. And when the sentence was handed down by Justice Campbell, he started off the proceeding by saying if the offender wasn't intoxicated, he wouldn't have hit Thomas, and therefore it's on the low side of manslaughter because it's a mitigating case. And I just remember sitting there feeling like I've been slammed yet again. And then he handed out the sentence of 4 years.
I should point out too that you successfully appealed that sentence, and
yes,
Kieran Loveridge, the man that punched your son, got a much longer sentence.
He did. So it went to the Court of Criminal Appeal, and then the defence appealed that, and it went to the High Court. So it's 3 years of being in court.
Can I ask you about a piece which I believe was in the paper the day that Stuart, the night of Stuart's freshman's dinner? This was in the Daily Telegraph in Sydney. We've got some image of it here. Kelly's charity director on $125,000. If you could sit down with the 2 journalists who wrote that, what would you want them to know?
Well, first of all, it was terrible for me because it almost made out like I was stealing from the foundation. In point of fact, what had happened is that the board had come to me and said, how are you faring? Because you're working 7 days a week on the foundation. And my business suffered terribly. And so it was the directors on the board who decided to pay me a salary. And it was in the board documents and in our end of the year financial report, which was put on our website.
So what was this article trying to infer?
I think that there were people who were anti the lockout laws, who again were trying to do everything in their power to actually bring down the foundation.
To be clear, you had effectively no other or very little other income.
Absolutely.
We had to sell our house because we had no income.
Okay.
There was a stage where we couldn't pay a council bill for $500.
Can you tell me some of the trolling that you and your kids received in recent years?
Well, there was definitely death threats. There was statements made like, let's kill off the rest of the Kelly dogs.
And where were these statements made?
Oh.
It's on social media.
On social media. There was even a point after we lost Stuart that we lost our dog, and I put on a nice picture of Stuart and the dog on Facebook, and people were saying there was some very nice feedback. But what happened, I just put that on my Facebook page, but of course the Sunday paper picked it up. And so then the comments there were nice comments, like this poor family, they've been through so much. And, I didn't put it on there for sympathy. But one person wrote, my budgie didn't get in the newspaper when it died last week. And then the worst one of all was this vile human being that I looked up on Facebook later on, who had a lovely little girl sitting on his lap. But he had said, oh, I thought it would have been something more interesting, like the mum or the dad necking themselves on one of the boys' anniversaries. So, that sort of thing.
What is that, do you think?
As much as you have to turn yourself off to that, it destroys you, to think that people spend their lives sitting back trolling and writing horrible things to people when they have absolutely no idea what our life has been like. It's very sad. I feel sorry for them.
You looked up that man with the little child sitting on his lap. What do you think that is? Why would a human being want to do that?
I don't know. I can't understand how people can be so cruel.
That's interesting because you've changed the name of the Thomas Keller Youth Foundation to Stay Kind.
Correct.
And you've had some remarkable acts of kindness towards you over the last 7 years. Can you tell me about some of those?
Well, in the beginning, many people, when you lose a son, they came and made us meals and did those kind of things for us. And then there were corporate acts of kindness where people would call us and support the foundation. And
Can you tell me about some of the more personal things, though?
The King's School that the boys went to have an art show, but after we lost Thomas, they usually get an artist to paint and donate a painting that they auction off. And so they asked us to come along to that because they were going to donate the proceedings of that sale to the foundation. And it was this beautiful painting of a king protea. And it sold for an incredible figure of just over $14,000. And then this lady came up to me and she said, I wanted to introduce myself. I'm Karen. I'm the mother of a boy in a lower year than what Stuart was in. Stuart was still alive. And I said, oh, you're so generous. What a magnificent donation you made and such a beautiful painting. I wish I could look at that painting every day. And she said, I bought it for you. And I hung that painting in the very entrance of our house and I invited her over to see it once we finally got it up there because it doesn't just remind me of Thomas, it reminds me of Stuart and their life at King's and the extraordinary generosity. And it's not just about those monetary things. There's been the simplest things, hasn't there? Just simple, kind gestures, people coming up when you don't know them and just wanting to give you a hug.
You're asking people through Stay Kind to commit to being kind. Commit how?
so we looked at 25 million Australians living in this country. That's pretty amazing. What if we all did one act of kindness every day? And, you know, when you work that out, I'm not a mathematician, but it's 9.1 billion acts of kindness a year.
So what constitutes an act of kindness? What would you ask people to do?
Really what we're saying is that you need to observe people, be non-judgmental, act responsibly and show an act of kindness. So it could be something simple from smiling at somebody else as they're walking towards you and saying good morning. And, you know, 9 times out of 10 people will smile back at you and say hello as well. And that small little act is so important. And many of us want to be kind. So collectively, we want to start a movement about kindness.
It's a lovely thought. I'm interested, though. You were bullied and abused when you were at school. Thomas was bullied and abused when he was at school. It appears as though the same thing happened to Stuart at university. Is kindness enough to break that cycle?
I think without kindness, what have we got? It's imperative that we all, we all get together and make Australia a great country. And I think you have to get community to make change. And as Andrew Scipione said to me in one of the very first meetings I had with him.
The former police commissioner.
Yes. And he said, Ralph, you know, 70% of our police resources are about violence. And I can't I cannot change violence. The only people who can change this is the community. And I think it's the same for kindness. If we have kindness, we don't have violence and bullying.
Doesn't, though, violence and bullying come from a deep place of pain as well? I mean, even the young man that punched your son, he himself had an abusive childhood. That's why I'm asking if kindness, which is clearly a good thing, is kindness enough?
I think there will be some people who can't be kind. But I think, you know, one of our campaigns will be, you know, targeted towards families. And as a father or as a mother, you know, when you get home from work, you'd say to your children, I did this at work today to help somebody, and then say to the children, what did you do at school today that was kind to other students?
So model that behaviour.
You need to model it. So what we're doing is that we're going to ask Australians to pledge to their kindness. So they can come to our website and pledge that they are kind.
And there's going to be a kind July.
A kind July. So in the month of July, we're really trying to get people really, you know, communicate through media partners about being kind.
Kathy, let's talk about this on a personal level. You told our producer that there are times where you wish that the man who punched Thomas would die in prison. So how do you reconcile your understandable anger with a desire to be kind?
I think we're all made up of many parts, and I don't think it's a particularly healthy way to live your life to feel that angry towards somebody. And I think had there ever been any remorse shown or by him or his family, that maybe I could have come to terms with some kind of forgiveness. And I think forgiveness is really quite a beautiful thing. But when you feel, and there were numerous things that have occurred over the years that sort of kept sort of pushing us down, it's a very difficult thing to want to forgive somebody like that.
4 or 5 months after Thomas was murdered, I was at Sydney Airport one day waiting for a flight, and I was crying uncontrollably, and I had just tears pouring down my face, and I didn't think I could move off that chair because I was crying so much. And grief comes over you during the quietest of moments.
Ralph, recently Kathy got upset at the way you answered a question on a form about how many children you have. Can you tell me what happened? How did you answer on the form?
I think I said 1.
And Kathy, why did that?
We were both filling out the form at the same time.
Yes.
We were going to a gym, which didn't really last long, unfortunately. But
you and 90% of Australia are
tried.
yeah. And I was looking over it, and I saw that he wrote 1, and I just looked at him and said, how could you do that? But I remember the first time somebody asked me how many children I had after Thomas had died, and I did say 2, and I kicked myself for the rest of the day. I was really bitterly angry with myself for not being honest. But I've always got in my head how old they are now, and I always say 3. And
will it be always that way, do you think? Or
I
will
think
it be
so.
a time where you will let that go?
I don't think I could ever let that go. And, you know, to me, that is a way of keeping the boys alive.
And we were lucky to have 2 such gorgeous boys. You know, it's better to have loved and have lived than have never to have loved at all. And that's really true. I look back at our lives with them, and they were enriched by their time on this planet. And for that, I'm thankful. I'm sorry that we lost them, but incredibly thankful for the time that I got to spend with them.
Can we talk about your 3rd child, Madeline? She didn't want any part of this interview.
No, and that's one of the reasons that we decided to change the foundation name as well. Not just for Madeline, for myself and maybe for Ralph ultimately, so that we can walk away when the time's right, and hopefully the work will continue on and grow and be stronger.
How important is it for Madeline not to be Thomas and Stuart Kelly's sister in the public eye?
I think that's definitely in the back of her mind all the time, and she's had about 1.5 years in the position that she's in the legal industry, and she is now ready to move on and become a solicitor, and she wants to do that abroad.
Ralph, how hard is it not to pin your anxieties and your hopes, so many of them, on Madeline? Because I think many parents watching this tonight, in your situation, would feel so protective.
Oh, absolutely. Quite often if she goes out, she may ask me to drive her into the city and I'm literally shaking from fear, I guess, in many ways, that, you know, she comes home safely. She always says, Dad, look, I'm 23 years old, I'm capable of looking after myself, but you still have this underlying, you know, we've lost 2 children, we definitely don't want to lose a third.
It feels to me that's tough for her.
It is, and we have to let her live her life. I've always said that. You cannot wrap them up. I mean, the moment Thomas died...
You believe that? Do you feel it, though?
No, you don't feel it, but you want to wrap them up. You don't want them to ever leave the house. But I just believe that we cannot restrict her from being the young woman that she wants to be.
And yet, and I'm not saying this critically because I think I would find it almost impossible. You say that you cannot restrict her, but what you're just describing then of I don't want her ever to leave the house, that's what she's hearing, isn't it, emotionally?
Oh, I'm sure, and, you know, with all this conversation about her possibly wanting to go and live abroad, when are you going, Madeline? Because I want to come with you, and Dad's got to try and find some work, and how are we going to make this work? But we're all going because you're not going to be on the other side of the world and we're going to be here. So I'm going on with all that nonsense all the time, but I guess a little part of me...
It's probably not nonsense to her.
No, a little part of me wants it to happen, if that's what she wants. I think after all that's been said and done and the amount of times that we've been in the public eye, and I know we've just written a book, so, you know, we've kind of asked to be back in the public eye by doing that. I just really want to be left alone.
Well, that's an interesting question. Do you dream about just walking off and not being?
I look at houses every night when I go to bed for rent.
Really? So you can stop being Ralph and Kathy Kelly, the
Yeah.
parents of Stuart and Thomas, but can just be Ralph and Kathy?
I just want to be able to give Madeline the opportunity to have as much happiness as she can possibly get from the little diminishing family that we have left. But I think ultimately, at the end of the day, it would be lovely to remember the boys for who they were and not have to think about alcohol, violence, murder, suicide. And I think whilst we're still engulfed in that, that's going to be really hard to be able to step away from that. So I think ultimately, I can't speak for Madeline, but I think that she wants to go away like Stuart wanted to go away, and now I'm kind of thinking I'd like to go away as well. And I'm hoping that one day that might be a possibility so we can rest in our own thoughts.
Let's talk about the path ahead for the two of you. You've been married 27 years. This has been a huge strain on your marriage. Kathy, you said to Ralph on one occasion, stop saving the world, save our family.
Yeah.
Where were those words coming from?
You know, I don't like to say it because I don't want people to not believe that I am in support of what Ralph has achieved. But I think there's a little part of me every day that just wishes we could just put all that behind us. And I don't mean, when I say behind us, to forget about the boys, but put all this work that he's doing behind us so that...
A little part of you?
It's probably a big part of me. And I don't want to say that because I don't want him to feel that I don't respect what he's done, because I do.
Do you feel that Kathy doesn't respect you when she said something like that?
I don't think it's a lack of respect. I think it's a different perspective. It's probably saved my life, you know, working...
The foundation.
The foundation,
Yeah,
absolutely.
absolutely.
It gave me a channel to get involved in. 4 or 5 months after Thomas was murdered, I was at Sydney Airport one day waiting for a flight, and I was crying uncontrollably, and I had just tears pouring down my face. And I'm sitting in a coffee shop with people around me, and I didn't think I could move off that chair because I was crying so much. And grief comes over you during the quietest of moments. And we carry that grief constantly. And the foundation gave me an output for that to channel the grief.
You have, at different times over the last years, talked about separating. What keeps you together?
I think our understanding of each other,
Yeah.
we
That is a
have,
good laugh, Kathy.
that we've been through something that most people don't have to go through. And I think that we've been able to get through this because we both understand the enormity of what's hit our world.
Why did you laugh?
Why did I laugh? I just remember, this is not really the answer to the question, but I remember saying to Ralph at one point, you know, I know that I'm not always the person you want me to be and that you don't think I'm being difficult and all that sort of stuff. But at the end of the day, no one will ever be able to understand what you've been through or what I've been through better than each other. So why don't we stick at this and be together? Why did I laugh? It's not easy, put it that way. And I guess, you know, it's nice to be completely truthful with each other. People come up to us all the time and say, oh my God, you're just this remarkable couple, you know, you're so strong and we got this gorgeous happy marriage, and they only knew what it was like.
Look, it's very difficult. I went to a weekend away for fathers who had homicide of children, and there was about 12 of us in this weekend away in the Hunter Valley. And
God, you have some depressing times, Ralph, I have to say.
actually, Kathy made me go.
Oh, really?
No, I didn't think he would ever go because he was never the sort of person who would ever do something like that.
Yeah.
And this was a homicide victim support weekend.
Right.
And so he was away with a bunch of men and hearing horrific stories about how their daughters had died due to the hands of other men with domestic violence. But the man that he shared the room with had been a victim of homicide longer, and I don't know how it occurred, but he explained to Ralph about how he needed to be able to support me. And I felt for the first probably close to a year that, you know, I was sobbing and nobody was listening and he couldn't put his arms around me because men like to fix a situation and they can't fix a crying woman. They don't know how to fix them. So he didn't know what to do and I felt more and more alone. But this man told him to go home and give me a hug.
Did you hear that?
I did, and I did.
There have been times where I've really thought, I just can't do this anymore, I can't. And I remember she knew I felt like that. And she said to me, Mum, if you do something, I'll be right after you. I can't let that happen to her life. I have to be here to give her some happiness.
You have questioned at times the value, the purpose of being alive. What gives your life meaning now? It shouldn't just be about Madeline, but she's our only remaining child. And I have to be strong for her. But there's parts of me that crumple every day, and I'm sure that's exactly how Madeline and Ralph are. You know, I never heard that story about him sitting at the airport in tears until just now. But I have to know that I have to be here for her. I can't let her down. And there have been times where I've really thought, I just can't do this anymore, I can't. And I remember she knew I felt like that. And she said to me, Mum, if you do something, I'll be right after you. I can't let that happen to her life. I have to be here to give her some happiness. Even though most of the time she doesn't really get along with me all that well anyway. She's Well,
way more like her dad than she is like me.
Mums and daughters is never easy.
Yeah.
Are you getting help?
I did for about a year, very early on, the only one that had any help. And
Ralph, you haven't had?
no. And I have had people, I've had an old school friend come to me one day and she said, I went through a suicide help group with my sister. I would like to do that for you if you would like me to be there to partner you through that. And I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that, but I often feel that how can anybody tell me anything that's going to make me feel better about the boys? And do I really want to hear about all the pain of other people? You know, I do get that. I mean, I've done a little bit of speaking and people come and tell you the most personal things, and sometimes you don't want to hear it, and other times you walk away and you think, I helped that person today, so maybe that was a good thing that I was brave and I got up and did what I had to do. But whenever I have the opportunity to speak to someone, what gets me through is I know that the boys are always there with me and helping me.
Maybe it's not someone else you need to hear tell you these things, maybe it's you.
Yeah, and that's a hard thing to do sometimes.
Well, we're talking about kindness. So how are you finding ways to be kind to yourselves?
I think we need to be kind to each other sometimes because you do get caught up in your own world. But I suppose when we talk about that, you know, that little bit of bitterness, like stop saving everybody else and save us, I just want him to recognise that, you know, I also need a part of him to be able to make me want to carry on as well. Because it can't just be about Madeline. She is going to live her life and hopefully one day she'll have a family of her own. And then, you know, we're just with each other. And I've always been determined that we really have to try hard to make it work because we have a deep understanding of each other. And that's not something you find by switching partners tomorrow. I don't want to do that.
Ralph, you sat there very quietly.
I'm flying under the radar.
I say too much.
So I'm going to start with you here, and I'm going to finish this interview by throwing out the challenge that you are throwing out to Australia. I'm going to ask you to commit to an act of kindness for Kathy. What would that be?
I think it would be very much to spend a lot more time with her, talking to her. Quite often I just get so emotionally exhausted by the end of the day. You know, you can often find me in bed at 7:30 at night, so I can make pledge an act of kindness that I'll spend a lot more time talking to her when I get home at night.
That would be nice.
Kathy, what act of kindness will you pledge to Ralph?
Oh, that was really good. How am I going to follow that?
Maybe you could make me breakfast in bed.
Look, I would absolutely love that. I think we need to spend more time together.
Sure.
But I react poorly sometimes. Maybe I could try and be a little bit more understanding.
Well, I'm sure everyone watching tonight is perfect and is judging you for not being. I'm also quite sure, and I speak as a parent, that there is a deep understanding of the pain you both carry. I wish you well with your pledges of kindness to each other, but particularly with being kind to yourselves.
Thank you.
Kathy and Ralph, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
If you had said to me 10 years ago that I'd be out picking fucking roses, you know, yeah, I would have gone,
And
you're
putting
nuts.
them in a vase.
And I'm getting good at, yeah.
You're good at flower arranging.
Listen to this. This is what's happened.
This is what we always knew would happen.
Listen to this. This is true. This is what happened. We
my
went
God.
and seen, what's it called?
About Queen Anne.
About Queen Anne, the
you
great
know,
film.
the-
Anyway, it's this great movie, right? And it's full on, and the bloody, she's sleeping with chicks everywhere and all this sort of stuff. And I'm sitting there, and Jane and I watch this film, and I'm going, oh my God, I'm looking at the fucking flower arrangements. What has happened to me?